good? Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce or welcome you to the City of Wildwood's Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for October 21st. On tonight's agenda, we have 2 public hearing items, 1 draft letter of recommendation, 2 correspondence items, and a site development plan recommendation. Can I have a roll call of commissioners?
Commissioner Helfrey, Commissioner Levitt,
Present.
Commissioner Cohn,
Here.
Commissioner Gragnani,
Here.
Commissioner Beatty,
Here.
Commissioner Deppler,
Here.
Commissioner Simpson, Chair Lee,
Present.
Councilmember Werther,
Present.
Mayor Bolin.
Here.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion for the approval of the minutes? Commissioner Gragnani, second. Councilman Werther, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
3 to the right here.
Okay, thank you.
We good, Travis? Okay. Joe, does the department have any opening remarks?
No, sir, but thank you for asking.
Okay. Moving on to the public hearings. In the City of Wildwood, public hearings are truly intended to accept comments and questions.
Mr. Chair, pardon my interruption.
Go ahead.
I would never do that unless it was necessary. We do have a public comment session before we
Okay.
move into public hearings.
Public comments.
For the public comment session portion of the agenda, Donnie,
Hi, my name's Donnie Hath, and I'm from Sherman. And on the topic of the Bellevue Farms, we had looked the plan over, and we're very happy with working with Joe and everything that has been going on with that. All the hard work he's put into it, and the town of Sherman is in favor of the plan, and we're unanimous on that. So, thank you very much.
Ms. Tams, I believe.
Hi, I'm Krista Taves. I live at 1470 St. Paul Road, Baldwin, Missouri, live in Sherman. And I also wanted to say that we very much support the plan that is here. And thank you to Travis and thank you to Joe for all the work they've done. And also that we have formed a 501c3 called Friends of Bellevue. And the purpose of that organization is to support and be in partnership with Wildwood and the county. Our purpose is to raise funds for Bellevue as well as to provide person power to work on the park and work with Wildwood. So thank you very much. We've really appreciated how we've been heard, and we look forward to working with you from here on.
Thank you for your comments. Travis?
No more speaker cards for the public comment session.
Okay. So now I'll move into the public hearing.
My apologies for that.
No, it's all right. In the City of Wildwood, public hearings are truly intended to accept comments and questions concerning these items. Since this is a public hearing, it is only intended to provide information on these requests. No action is planned on these items tonight, and consideration of them is to be taken no earlier than November 18th, 2019. The City's Department of Planning will address the comments, questions, and concerns that are raised tonight and include them as part of their formal recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Public hearings are conducted as described in the handout provided on the table in the reception area, along with information on these matters. The Commission will allow all parties adequate time to present their positions and ask that you respect all opinions by other speakers and avoid interrupting anyone during their time at the podium. Anyone wanting to speak or receive future information on these items should fill out a speaker's card and leave it with Mr. Newberry. In addition, information on these items can be found on the city's website at www.cityofwildwood.com. The Commission would like to thank you for your cooperation and participation in tonight's hearings. Mr. Newberry.
PZ 12-19, Zachary Pilgrim, 4733 Fox Creek Road, Wildwood, Missouri 63069, care of Power Home Solar, 209 Hughes Lane, St. Charles, Missouri 63301. A request for a conditional use permit in the NU Non-Urban Residence District and FPNU Floodplain Non-Urban Residence District. Street address 4733 Fox Creek Road, locator number 28Y220053 for the installation of ground-mounted solar panels upon this 3-acre parcel of land, which is located on the east side of Fox Creek Road, north of Foxview Lane. This request is to be reviewed in accordance with Chapter 415.090 NU Non-Urban Residence District Regulations of the City of Wildwood Zoning Ordinance, which establishes standards and requirements for the installation of solar panels. The requested permit is required due to the proposed solar panels being of a ground-mounted design type. Ward 6, action to remove from active agenda of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Department of Planning identified this item at the last meeting at the beginning of October, in that the request was received this summer, and shortly before the intended public hearing was to be held, we had that August storm event and significant flooding in many locations in Wildwood. One of those locations was Fox Creek Road. The extent of flooding on certain properties was significant, and this particular site was one of them. The location of the solar panels was actually in an area that was under several feet of water, and so the owners are rethinking the location. That rethinking has taken a little longer, so the department is respectfully requesting this item be removed from the active agenda to the inactive agenda of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And this action is not punitive, meaning that if and when the owners find a location, it can be easily then moved back to the active agenda and heard at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. We have a motion or open for
So
discussion?
moved.
Mayor Bullen, second by Commissioner Beatty. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Levitt.
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn.
Yes.
Commissioner Gragnani.
Yes.
Commissioner Beatty.
Yes.
Commissioner Deppler.
Yes.
Chair Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Werther.
Aye.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Newberry.
PZ 15-19, Chesterfield Montessori School, 1400 Ladue Road, Chesterfield, Missouri 63017. A request for a conditional use permit in the NU Non-Urban Residence District and FPNU Floodplain Non-Urban Residence District for a 7.19 acre tract of land that is located on the southeast side of Babbler Park Drive, west of State Route 109, locator number 20W420051, street address 17950 Pond Bridge Road. Proposed use: outdoor education center to be utilized by a private not-for-profit elementary school with supporting storage structure which is inclusive of a covered patio area, associated parking lot, and a vault-type restroom facility. Ward 3.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, before inviting the petitioner or petitioner's representative to come forward and present this particular item, the Department of Planning would like to introduce into tonight's record the following items: the city's charter, the city's master plan, which includes the conceptual land use categories and associated map, the zoning ordinance, which establishes the zoning district designations, as well as the conditional use permit process and procedures, the file that has been developed and maintained by the Department of Planning regarding this request, and then finally any testimony, exhibits, or other evidence provided as part of tonight's public hearing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry. Speakers.
Mr. Chair, the department has a brief slide presentation just to give everybody a view of the property. There we go. So we began the presentation with just an area map showing the parcel that's highlighted in blue here. And just to show you its proximity to State Route 109, it's along State Route BA or Babbitt Park Drive and near Babbitt State Park. This is just an aerial photograph of the site itself. And then just a map identifying the zoning district designations. The yellow is the NU non-urban residence district. The blue is the FPNU floodplain non-urban residence district. Again, the property highlighted in the light blue color. This is the site plan. The red box you see is the proposed footprint of the proposed new structure, and then the smaller restroom. And then the blue is an existing pond, which I have photographs of, and then the black rectangles to the northeast are existing barn and metal building that are to remain. First photograph is standing at the proposed entrance and looking to the south and west along Babbitt Park Drive, also known as State Route BAA. This is standing in the same location, looking towards Babbitt Park Drive's intersection with State Route 109. You can see the signs beyond the city's truck there parked on the side of the road. That's the intersection. This is just a photograph standing at the farthest west point of the property corner, looking to the north and east along the site's frontage. This is standing in a similar location, looking towards where the parking area, a portion of the parking area and drive aisle would be. This is probably a better representation of that area. This is standing closer to the creek, looking towards the proposed entrance where the previous photographs were taken from. The drive aisle would be on this side of those two large trees that you see. This is standing in that same location, looking north and to the east. You can see between the larger space between the two trees, you can see the barn in the background a bit, but I have closer photographs of that. This is just a photograph of the small pond that exists and is to remain as identified on the plan sheet, with the barn also in the background of this photograph. There's a photograph of the barn, and there's a metal structure attached on the right there. This is a closer photograph of the barn. And then just another perspective on the back side of the barn, and then the metal structure that I've referenced in previous slides. And this is the last photograph. This is standing at the farthest north and east property corner, looking back to where we started, towards the proposed entrance beyond where the city's truck is parked. And then this is just back to the site plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Speaker cards.
The petitioner turned in as a speaker card Mr. Keitel.
Chairman, members of the commission, for the record, my name's Ken Keitel with TerraSpec. Office is at 11426 Gravois Road, South St. Louis, 63126. We're here this evening on behalf of the petitioner, Chesterfield Montessori Schools, with their request for a CUP in the non-urban and floodplain non-urban districts. The site is located, as Mr. Newberry indicated, off of Babbitt Park Drive, even though it's got a different address. That address is actually off of a paper street at the rear of the property. With me this evening is Ms. Kim Snyder, who is in charge of the Chesterfield Montessori Schools, and I know she would like to make a little presentation to just kind of inform you of what all they do out at the site. Their main campus is, I believe, at Is it Clayton and 141? It might be Kurzmill. Anyway. And as Mr. Newberry said, the proposal is to come in and construct a barn-like structure that the kids that come out to the site can utilize as shelter, and also that they can store some small equipment in that they utilize when they go out to the site. Most of the time, the kids go out there a couple times a week. There's like a dozen children that go out in a van, and then there's usually one other vehicle that goes out there, and they go out a couple times a week. This is a picture of the proposed building that they're looking at doing. It's more or less a metal butler building with some shelters on both sides. The equipment would be stored on the inside. We've tried to locate, as you saw on the site plan, the vast majority of the 7 acres is within the floodplain. The bold dashed line that's going right through the middle of the property is the floodway line. The floodplain line actually goes right up along, I'll call it the northwest property line that parallels Babbler Park Drive, and then kind of swoops on down, and then we've put the building on it's out of the floodplain, as well as the vast majority of the drive and the parking. So there will be very little disturbance done in the floodplain at all. And with that being said, I'd like to turn it over for a few minutes, if you don't have any questions, to Ms. Snyder, so that she can give you a little more information on how the school operates. Are there any questions before I have her?
Does the commission have any questions for Mr. Keitel?
Okay,
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kimberly Schneider, and I am the head of school at Chesterfield Montessori School, which is located at 14,000 Ladue Road in Chesterfield. And Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, and members of the commission, I appreciate your time. Mr. Vunich and Mr. Newberry also. I just wanted to give you a little background of how our students have been using the property and what we envision. We acquired this property, which is 7 acres, several years ago. And in that time, once or twice a week in the fall and the spring, a small group of students, usually about 11 or 12 students, will go out there with the teachers, and they've been engaging in wildlife preservation, conservation, and habitat restoration. So they've been working with the St. Louis Audubon Society, they've been working with the St. Louis Stream Team, with the Shaw Nature Reserve, and what they've been doing over a period of a few years, for instance, it took them 3 years to clear all the honeysuckle, the invasive honeysuckle, off the property. I don't know if any of you have had that in your yard, but it takes a few years to get rid of it. So they were really diligent. They've also planted over 1,000, last spring they planted 1,000 new native plants on the property. And these plants are designed to bring in more birds, more bees, butterflies, pollinators, and also working to keep the stream really clean, again, for really a habitat restoration. And the St. Louis Stream Team has told us that we now have one of the cleanest creeks in St. Louis County. So the students have been working really hard to improve this land, and we would now like to formalize that process by creating this structure that would really enhance their work and allow them to stay out there a little bit longer during the day, and to store some tools so they don't have to haul them back and forth. And that's really all that we're looking to do. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions? No questions.
Okay, thank you.
Speaker cards?
I haven't received any speaker cards other than from the petitioners who just spoke.
Okay. Mr. Vunich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, as you know, this is a public hearing tonight, so there is no formal recommendation from the Department of Planning. I did want to note that during the review of the application, we paid special attention to the floodplain issues. I think one of the comment forms you received from the Department of Planning that came via our website described how there was flooding on the site during our very wet summer and early fall. And so the Department of Public Works and the Department of Planning were cognizant of that situation. And as Mr. Keitel mentioned, the structure is intended to be outside the floodplain area and not within the floodplain area. And no disturbance is anticipated in the floodway, which is consistent with both federal, state, and local requirements. There is one item I'd like to identify, then I will conclude, and Mr. Newberry and I will be available for questions, is that in discussions with petitioner's representative, there is a small vault restroom facility that's shown. That vault restroom facility is, I believe, a future phase. And in discussions again with the applicant petitioner, the department recommended they show the build-out versus a phased approach. That way the commission can see what the long-term plan is, which is often easier for you then to make your decisions. And with that, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the opportunity to address the commission, and if there are any questions for Mr. Newberry, I or the petitioner, we'd be glad to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Open for questions. Commissioner Cohn.
Is there any consideration or need to review it about a metal building?
The department's opinion on the building will be that architectural review will be required by the city. And if the Planning and Zoning Commission grants the permit, you should expect that to be a condition.
Commissioner Levitt.
It seemed like the one comment form that we received that spoke against this property was focused largely on the fact that it's a floodplain. It had recent flooding. There was a nearby rescue. Given, though, that this is sort of a frequent field trip location, for lack of a better phrase, I'm guessing in inclement weather, they wouldn't be sending students there anyway. Is that correct?
I'm sure the head of school could probably answer that better than I.
Thank you for asking that, Mr. Levitt. We always check the weather, and if it's going to storm, they just don't go. That's the bottom line. And I meant to also say that we're only going to be using the very small space of this, our 7 acres, for this structure, and really nothing's going to change, from what we've been doing. So there shouldn't be any additional traffic, anything that would make the neighbors notice anything different other than the structure.
Mr. Vunich, I have a question. Is there a reason to keep the old barn and shed? It looks like it's going to fall down any day now.
Well, certainly, again, I would defer to head of school, but there are some characteristics of that structure that make it somewhat historical, and certainly I'm sure it may be a future project for the school someday. You never know. But I will defer to the head. Thank you.
We don't let the students go into that building. We do have some things stored in there. We do like the look of it, the character that it provides. We also would be open to suggestions from the city on what you felt was wise. But we don't let the students use the building.
No other questions. So, Mr. Vunich.
Mr. Chair, respectfully, there could be a motion and second.
I have a motion. Commissioner Grignani, second by Councilman Werther. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Closed. Moving on, we have on old business, a letter of recommendation. Mr. Newberry.
PZ 14-19, City of Wildwood, Missouri, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri 63040, care of Department of Planning. A request to develop new legislation relating to the small cell technology in association with the new telecommunications services pertaining to the placement, installation, and construction of communication and support structures, wireless facilities, and accessory equipment. Administrative procedures related to the consideration thereof by the city and the promotion of the health, safety, and welfare of Wildwood residents, all consistent with current federal and state laws and regulations, all wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Punich.
Pardon me, I can't quite find the logo, but hopefully you'll bear with me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, before you tonight in draft form is the letter of recommendation relating to the topic that Mr. Newberry just read into the record. That topic deals with small cell technology associated with wireless providers of both voice and data in terms of the internet. The Department of Planning presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission an information report with recommendations supporting a model ordinance that had been prepared by the Missouri Municipal League. That model ordinance addresses the components that are contained in state statute, as well as identifying in clearer language the rights and responsibilities of the City of Wildwood. A question was raised by the Planning and Zoning Commission when this particular item was presented, is this something the city has to do? And yes, as described by the city attorney, state statute in this instance requires the consideration and adoption of these rules and regulations for the benefit of expanding a more robust internet access service to all areas of the state of Missouri. Acknowledging that, the Planning and Zoning Commission on September 16, 2019 unanimously approved the regulations as presented by the city attorney and the Department of Planning. There was one abstention, Mr. Werther. So tonight, based upon that action, this particular draft letter of recommendation is in the appropriate form for final action. Mr. Chair, after opening the floor for a discussion or a motion, the Department of Planning and the City Attorney will be available for any questions or comments. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Punich. Councilman Werther.
I'll make my declaratory statement that I typically do when it comes to matters regarding telecommunications, whether it be small cell technology or the two ongoing operation requests that will follow under new business. I will be abstaining since I am employed by that industry.
Any discussion? If not, can I have a motion? Commissioner Grignani.
I'll make a motion to accept the letter of recommendation.
Second by Commissioner Levitt. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Cohn?
Yes.
Commissioner Grignani?
Yes.
Commissioner Beatty?
Yes.
Commissioner Deppler?
Yes.
Commissioner Levitt?
Yes.
Chair Lee?
Yes.
Councilmember Werther? Mayor Boland?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You ready?
Sorry. Could do it more gracefully. Mr. Chair, with your permission.
Okay.
A request for the ongoing operation of an existing telecommunications tower and facility authorized by PZ 25-97 Sprint Spectrum LP, Marinus Retreat Center. Conditional use, CUP, in the NU Non-Urban Resident District, east side of State Route 109, south of Old State Road, under a one-year renewal allowed by the existing conditions of the site-specific permit. This particular property is located in Ward 6.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the commission members probably recall, this is a 115-foot cell tower that's located at the Marianist Retreat Center that was approved by the City Council by resolution in 1998. It had a first initial 5-year review period that was conducted in 2003, and it has been reviewed by the commission for compliance with the permit since then every year. And the last such review was conducted in October of 2018, so here we are in 2019. I'll start with a slideshow of photographs of the current conditions of the site. It's a bit dark, but this is the tower itself. A little bit of a close-up shot to see that the wiring and antenna are painted to match the color of the pole, white color. This is the gate area. The next series of photographs are just the various walls of the equipment structure. Again. And as you can see by the photographs that were provided tonight and in the report and the department's recommendation, the site is in excellent condition and meets all of the existing requirements of the conditional use permit. Therefore, the department is recommending its annual renewal until the same time next year, October, November of 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Commissioner Grignani.
Mr. Vunich, is there a reason that we have to do these annually? Especially this one, which has never had a problem that, well, I guess once it had a couple broken boards in the door, in the gates, but
Historically, and not so much of recent times, the cell phone industry and then the private companies that own towers and lease space on them had a mixed record of maintenance. And the Planning and Zoning Commission, at the recommendation of the Department of Planning, agreed that although it's a step in the process each year, it's a good step because the owners of the tower understand that there is a review and that if something's wrong, it usually gets fixed before the city proceeds. I know it's not the most taxing issue we face at times,
right.
But I think the reason most of our tower facilities look good is that we keep an eye on them and you're given the opportunity to comment.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Boland.
I guess this is a question to Joe and or the city attorney, but what about the option requiring some of these tower owners to disguise the tower as a tree or something? I know other municipalities do that. Can we do that? And I guess that's the first question.
As you may recall, earlier this year, or maybe towards the end of last year, we had done some substantive revisions to the city code regarding cell towers at the requirement of amendments to state statute, which have somewhat limited our ability to require that type of disguising of towers. Now, we can still be reasonable, but that's a debatable topic when you come to disguising them as trees or other types of entities.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, to the mayor. Initially, when planning and zoning commissions were asked to consider these types of towers, the proverbial or the ongoing question was, do we want smaller facilities and more of them, or less facilities but maybe taller in height, so we could get more co-location. In this particular instance, the tower's packed, and that's why in recent times the commission was asked to allow for the exterior mounting of antenna. It's a very popular location. We have, I believe, 5 providers on the tower, which means we have 4 less poles in the area. Now, acknowledging that it was difficult to do a disguised support structure because they become less favorable for co-location opportunities.
Fair enough. I would just ask going forward that to the extent permissible and that it's reasonable, given if it's secluded, no one sees it, that's one thing, but if it's in a neighborhood area or next to one of our arterial roadways or something, that we do give some thought to requiring disguising of these things.
Mr. Mayor, consider it a priority on the part of the department.
Thank you.
Seeing no other comments,
I made my statement earlier. You can
Okay,
proceed with the
good.
motion.
okay, great. So moving on to a roll call vote.
Mr. Chair, if I could have
Or
a
a
motion,
motion.
please. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Beatty, second. Commissioner Deppler. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Levitt,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn. Yes. Commissioner Gragnani.
Yes.
Commissioner Deppler.
Yes.
Commissioner, pardon me, Beatty.
Yes.
Chair Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Werther,
Abstain.
and Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Vunich.
The next item, a request for the ongoing operation of an existing telecommunications tower and facility authorized by PZ 4-98 AT&T Wireless Services, Inc. Conditional use permit, CUP, in the NU non-urban resident district, east side of Joe's Way, north of Valley Road, under a one-year renewal allowed by the existing conditions of the site-specific ordinance. This particular tower is located in Ward 2.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commission members, this is another annual renewal of a telecommunications facility that's located off of a private drive called Joe's Way. It was also approved in 1998 and had an initial 5-year review period established, which was conducted in 2003, and thereafter annual renewals have been conducted by the Commission. Move to the presentation of photographs that I prepared. The first photograph is standing on Joe's Way, the private drive, looking towards the facility. I would note it's difficult to see in the dark photograph, but there are two bushes that had been a topic of conversation. I'll get to those later in the presentation. This is the tower itself, again painted to match the horizon. These are the two bushes that were planted in 2018. They are leather leaf viburnum. They were a change in approach that the Commission requested given the past lack of success with another planting, a spruce tree. They were, again, planted as a requirement of the 2018 renewal. They were selected by the city's landscape consultant as being an appropriate species for this type of location. Obviously, they're still in their infancy. They're very small still, but with hopes that they'll grow into a larger size so that they provide the screening that is the intent of the plantings. But they appeared to be healthy at the department's site visit, which occurred on October 15th. And these are just some close-up photographs of them. And then just a few photographs of the side areas of the facility. This facility also is in excellent condition, meets all of the requirements of the underlying conditional use permit. The department would just note that with the new landscaping, we'll continue to monitor the health of the bushes and their growth, and make sure that they provide a screen sometime in the near future, hopefully. And with that, the department's recommending approval of the annual renewal for this facility.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Commissioner Gragnani.
Mr. Vunich, we have, just reading through the materials, there is a tower right next to this tower that is disguised as a tree that has several of its branches lying on the ground at the back corner of the enclosure, and we have never addressed that secondary enclosure. And when I was out there this morning, I saw the branches on the ground and noticed that this enclosure has now been painted, which it hadn't been, as I recall, the last time. That one was painted also, but this one has slats or something in it because you cannot see in it as well as the adjacent enclosure. And it's not quite as well maintained as this one is. And we have never addressed that secondary enclosure.
I'll do this as quickly as possible. The owner of that secondary facility had requested at one time the expansion of the tower that is the subject of tonight's discussion. Expansion in the sense of adding additional height to it so that more co-location could occur. Ultimately, the Planning and Zoning Commission did not grant that extension due to concerns primarily from residents in Clarkson Valley, which have a clear line of sight of this location more so than any resident in Wildwood. Thereafter, the applicant that was seeking the extension of this particular tower submitted a disguised support structure, a tree. And under our model telecommunication ordinance at that time, that was just an administrative review, and there are less requirements associated with it since they are doing a disguised support structure. I can assure you we'll contact the owner of the tower, advise them of the fallen branches and the need to spruce up the equipment area.
Would that one, so we can just ask them to do it. We can't force anything.
Well, in terms of the functionality and the appearance of the tree, it needs to look like a tree. So yes, we can do something. And then just general property maintenance code would apply.
Okay, because, when I was out there this morning, this one looks considerably better than the adjacent one.
Based upon Mr. Newberry's site visit and comments he provided, this is the best this location's looked.
It is. It very much is. I would agree, because I usually go out to this one. I was out at the Marianus one this morning also, but that one's has always looked nice. Yeah, I'm glad to see that the plants are doing better, so thank you.
Mayor Boland?
So I have a comment, but before I get to that, relative to Commissioner Gregnani's point, one option, unless there's exigent circumstances here, would be to postpone this until Joe can get input from the owner relative to the other site, and then see how that works, and then vote on it at that point.
We have time to accommodate a postponement till November, and we can certainly make that contact during the next 2-week period.
I'd make a motion to postpone to the first meeting of the commission in November for that purpose.
Second by Commissioner Levitt. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
And then I have a comment.
And Mayor Boland.
Going forward, relative to the discussion we just had about the reasonableness of requiring disguising, and I'm assuming one factor in that reasonableness would be where the tower is located vis-a-vis public view of it. If we could get a map included with the reports, an aerial map that shows where that is located, pinpoints that would be helpful.
We'd be glad to do that, and our apologies for not
No worries.
thinking of it
No worries.
before.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Newberry, are you going to read the site development plan?
Yes, sir. A recommendation of the Department of Planning to the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding a revised design for the installation of limited improvements in Bellevue Farms Park per the lease agreement between Wildwood and St. Louis County, PS Park and Scenic District, an approximately 100-acre tract of land that is located on the northwest corner of St. Paul Road and Hunt Street, St. Louis County locator number 26T210057, street address 1333 Bellevue Farm Road, which endorses the relocation and reduction in levels of parking and site disturbance while preserving the viewscape of the valley for all users of the facility, all wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, as you may recall, Bellevue Farms is a park site that is owned by St. Louis County and was donated to that particular jurisdiction by a gentleman named Harold Donnelly. The deed and the transfer documentation from Mr. Donnelly to St. Louis County, Missouri, spoke of the property being part a park and a reserve. The reserve being defined as that with very passive uses, if any, and intended to provide wildlife areas, conservation opportunities, and aesthetic beauty. The lease with St. Louis County has been extended on at least 2 occasions to accommodate more and more discussion and study of the property. The residents in the area, 2 of which spoke tonight during public comment, representing Sherman, a unincorporated village with a very, very long history, noted that they have been very much involved in the discussions relating to this property, as well as many others in the vicinity. That discussion has led to an outcome, and that outcome is tonight's proposed site development plan. The story is interesting on the development of this plan in that, as you know, originally the city had a consultant do a very simple plan consistent with the lease agreement and the required improvements associated with that document to what if the city had all the funding in the world, so to speak, and the support of the neighborhood, what would we do? Neither of those plans fit well from the spectrum of very lease-wise to the ultimate outcome. And then thereafter, a local entity, Gateway Off-Road Cyclists, GORC, began discussions with the city about potentially using this for a biking or mountain biking facility. Their plan called for extensive development in many regards of the property, particularly in the areas of the historical structures and buildings, and from the department's perspective, the viewscape, which is unparalleled in many regards in the West County area, if not the St. Louis region and beyond. The GORC proposal worked through both the Planning and Parks Committee, the Parks Action Plan Update Committee, the City Council, and the Planning and Zoning Commission. And ultimately a decision was made that in this particular instance, other options would be better, and Bellevue Farms should stay more reserve than park. After that decision was reached, the representatives of the community of Sherman and St. Louis County officials, along with the city of Wildwood, met, and it was a good discussion, and at the conclusion of that discussion, the decision was made to even go a little further and protect the property even more. Initially, most of the improvements were planned in the area where we have existing structures and buildings and the former location of the single-family dwelling. So this is at the top of the first ridge, so to speak, or level area from Hunt Street, and has the view down through the front portion of the site to the railroad and then beyond to the Merrimack River, and then the ridge line and small hills across the river that form what I believe to be is Tyson Research Center and other public and privately held properties. When thinking that through, and at the meeting that I've referenced with St. Louis County and the Sherman representatives, we all seem to notice almost at the same time that the location now that is being proposed for the limited extent improvements is a cedar grove. And that cedar grove is extensive. And the thought was, what if we built the improvements within that cedar grove, and that cedar grove provide a complete screening of the improvements from anywhere else on the property except Hunt Street and the immediate vicinity. I believe the St. Louis County officials felt that was appropriate, and certainly part and parcel of the decision, it came from some of the Sherman residents as well as the city of Wildwood. That set in motion the development of a plan, and this is the plan that is being presented tonight. The new entrance would be to the west of the existing gravel road. The new entrance would climb a sharp slope, level, and then provide parking. A few shelters are planned, and then an area, screened area for temporary restroom facilities. Hunt Street would be improved from St. Paul Road to the access point into the park facility, and then would taper from there west to the railroad viaduct to provide safe and accessible access both for residents of Sherman and others visiting the site. The trail system, which is represented better here, would emanate or extend from the parking lot up into the more developed area of the property. And then in discussions with the Sherman residents and again St. Louis County, there was a system of trails that even took you into the upper reaches or the northern portion of the site, which are still distinguishable and could be easily cleared, manicured, and used. The one change that wasn't incorporated into this particular plan is the trail segment across the viewscape. That will be eliminated. And the loop will form from the new portions, which are to the west of the existing Bellevue Farm Road as identified on the plan, and the road itself, which will form the initial loop. The intent is to preserve the viewscape. Preservation of this viewscape means no improvements, but in this particular instance, there will be invasive species removal and improvement of the current condition of the vegetation. The plan has been reviewed by St. Louis County, and they provided several comments, none of substantial change. And then again, you heard from two of the Sherman residents that have been representatives in all of our meetings saying they endorsed the plan. So tonight, the Department of Planning and Parks is presenting this plan to the Planning and Zoning Commission for its action and endorsement, and thereafter it would be sent to City Council for receipt and filing. If successful, then the Department of Planning and Parks will begin the refinements, which are the construction drawings, and incorporate the change to the soft trail area, and then find funding to begin the process of its development. With that, Mr. Chair, the department has concluded its presentation. Mr. Newberry and I are available for any comments and questions, and thank you as always.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mayor Bullard.
Joe, so I have a question, and I'm very much in favor of this, but the question you hit on really just in your last few words there related to funding. Could you give us just a brief background on, since this isn't in the city of Wildwood, although it is leased, the responsibility for improvements and where you anticipate the funding coming from and what the cost of that would be? And then when you're done with that, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say just a couple of words about the proposal.
The initial estimate for this is about $250,000, and it was actually budgeted this year, not knowing that we would end up at this particular design. So it's not necessarily coincidence. What we budgeted is what this design is, but it's more of what I think the amount we should spend based upon the extent of parking, the extent of asphalt surfacing, etc. So to answer your last question first, at this time about $250,000. Where that funding will come from, it will not be in this year's capital improvement budget. Long before the city agreed to accept this property from St. Louis County, it spent a great deal of time at the direction of City Council contacting other private not-for-profit organizations, other governmental agencies, and asking them if the city took this particular project on, would they be willing to participate both in terms of services, volunteers, and funding. We received generally positive comments, And so with those positive comments, we proceeded forward. Once we had the project underway in terms of planning and design, we returned to those partners to ask them again, here's what we're thinking. Are you still with us? And many of them offered volunteer opportunities to their organizations. Many said that they would also provide services such as hay rides and bird watching tours and things along those lines, but none of them offered any funding. And so that was, in the opinion of the department, a little change in direction on their part. So from that perspective, the department then began the process of talking with City Council about the benefit of development of this particular site, and that a minimal amount relative to many of our park projects could open up 100 acres for the use as walking and running trails, bird watching, many things that you can do in some of our parks, but certainly none are dedicated solely to that purpose. So I don't have a good answer to the funding, but I do have an interim solution, and it is the farms of Friends of Bellevue. They provided to the department a work program to begin the removal of invasive species. And I believe Donnie, who spoke first, has some ideas on how to secure some of the buildings. And so we're probably going to lean heavily on volunteers, the community of Sherman, and do some fundraising outside the normal channels that the city of Wildwood typically employs.
If I could to follow up on that, what is so this would be done on property we lease currently, correct?
Yes.
And what is the remaining term of that lease?
We are at a point of an extension in 2020, but I believe we have 20 years. The reason we're doing an extension is the simple fact that we've not met the requirement of improvements and opening the park for public use. And so that's the problem we face. So each time we miss that deadline, we have to go back and extend that deadline for the improvement levels. But the original lease was for 25 years. I believe we're in the 5th year of that 25-year period of time.
Okay, and so you say there's an extension of 20 years coming up?
An extension in terms of the improvement levels. Again, there was, for the most part, and you are an attorney and not I, but the original lease was for 25 years with a potential for an additional 25 years thereafter, much like Rock Hollow and Bluffview Park. In this particular instance, though, there was a set of requirements relating to a certain level of improvements and the facility being opened, and that's the extension we keep getting because we keep missing that deadline.
Okay, so just to sort of cut to the chase,
Sorry.
That's all right. Where I'm headed is, I mean, I wouldn't want, just hypothetically, for us to spend $250,000 and then lose the lease next year without reimbursement of that from St. Louis County. That's the lessor, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess my question is specifically, and maybe this is to the city attorney, are we comfortable that there will be long-term benefit to the residents of Wildwood and to Sherman and others, I guess, relative to this expenditure and in terms of benefiting them without the city facing some sort of inability to extend the lease and basically putting all the money out there with no recoupment or ability to control what happens going forward?
I am comfortable. I mean, it's not, the extension that we're obtaining is not an extension to the lease itself, it's an extension to a contingency in the lease. And we will have that before a single dollar is spent.
And that will be for how long?
Well, the contingency is simply that we will open it up to public use. So once we get the extension, then you can make the expenditure, and once it's open to public use, the contingency is met.
Okay, and so the duration of our lease then is what at that point?
It is 25 years with an extension, with a option for another 25 years.
Okay, and I guess my last question, thanks for your indulgence, is there any provision in the lease that in the event of termination, for example, for no realistically good reason by the county, that they would reimburse us for these costs?
I'm not aware of one, but I can double check that.
We will review the lease between St. Louis County and the city of Wildwood so we can give you a definitive answer. My recollection is there is a provision in the lease that there must be good cause for the termination of the lease. And I don't remember, and I'm almost sure, that there is no reimbursement clause associated with good cause. But I think you're driving to a point that the department's been arriving at for a bit now. If we struggle to proceed forward with this minimal set of improvements that maximizes the beauty of the property, I think it's only fair that we tell St. Louis County maybe this isn't the right fit for them and us, so to speak. And so in the extension of the contingency as described by City Attorney Young much better than I did in my explanation to you, we can certainly address that. If you feel strongly, as well as the rest of the commission, we'll say if we are successful, if you were to terminate the lease, we would expect some reimbursement of the cost, any of those, particularly from the taxpayers of Wildwood. Now, let's say Great Rivers Greenway supports it and donates a certain amount of money. I'll leave that to them to make their own argument.
So, on the one hand, my comment I was going to mention, I think this is a proud moment for our city. I mean, we've worked very hard, and you in particular, Joe, have been exceptional in terms of working with the Sherman residents, and they're, even though they're not part of Wildwood, they are our neighbors, and I think it is a proud moment. So, I would move that we do it, subject to getting confirmation that in the event of a termination by the county, we're reimbursed for the cost, or we have sources to otherwise get that reimbursement. And that's just, I think, something prudent from the standpoint of our resident taxpayers.
Thank you.
So that's the motion.
Okay. I have actually a question that I would like to ask.
Can we get a second? See if there's a second.
Second by Commissioner Levitt.
Thank you.
Do we do a vote, or can I ask my question?
I think
No, you
Mr.
go.
Beatty
Okay.
has a question as well, and I'd be glad to tackle yours, sir.
So, Mr. Boonage, I have a question on the drawing itself. On sheet C1, which is the next sheet, that O railroad track 4.12 degrees or feet south, the railroad is on the south side of Hunt Street. So what is that? And if that is an easement, then we need to look into that as something that we either try to get vacated or we have to deal with it.
We have to deal with the railroad and any easements or ownerships associated with the railroad. This is a very active track of the Union Pacific. At least that's the trains I see most utilizing it. And there was a question that was asked by a resident of Sherman about Hunt Street, because it certainly appears that it's in the railroad right-of-way. St. Louis County said it was more of a prescriptive issue, but at the end of the day, there is a roadway there that provides the sole access to the property unless we were to use St. Paul Road. And from the perspective of the Sherman residents, when the water's high on the Merrimack River, this is primarily their sole ingress and egress. So the department has always felt that if we are successful in opening the park and we can address access on Hunt Street, we've served two purposes. We've added 100 acres to public space for public purposes, and we've provided a much better and an improved, safer surface for the residents of Sherman and others.
So my question, part two, following Mayor Boland's request, is do we need railroad approval for this? Because they control Hunt Street.
We are working on that. I can assure you that Union Pacific is a very, 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 very big company. And spent a lot of time talking to people in Omaha, and so we'll continue to do so. I guess the good news or the bad news, depending on your perspective, I'm sure we'll talk to somebody and figure out what the railroad would like from the city of Wildwood. But right now, we don't have any funding to proceed forward, so we're not held up by that particular issue, but I appreciate you identifying it.
Well, I guess if we needed to, we could go from Bellevue Farm Road and make the connection there as a backup.
Yes, but again, that's served off of Hunt Street, same situation as as is with the new access point. The sole ownership, certainly the clear ownership of St. Paul Road, is between the city of Wildwood and St. Louis County in this area. Since St. Louis County actually owns Bellevue Farm, sure, they would not object to an access point there, but there's really no good location, in my opinion, on St. Paul Road for an access point. It's a slope from basically the city limit of Wildwood south to the river. There's a couple of 90-degree turns associated with it. So there's just some sight distance issues, and then there's also woodland areas that we would have to disturb, whereas here it's cedars. They provide great cover, screening, habitat, but again, we'll be selective and we'll do our very best to eliminate any excessive clearing of the cedars because they provide what we want.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Commissioner Beatty.
So on the cedars, I've been under the impression that those are actually kind of invasive as well. Are these a non-invasive variety?
Eastern red cedar are native to this area. That's primarily what you see out here. A lot of the equestrian residents in Wildwood remove them because in their pasture areas because they are, I believe, not good for horses and equine in general. So I don't necessarily consider them invasive, but certainly your point is well taken in that if we do remove them, we're not removing an oak, a hickory, a walnut, a cherry, or anything along those lines.
And then my other question is there any chance, I don't suppose there's any chance of getting potable water at this site?
Well, I would have to defer probably to Krista or Donnie who spoke, but I don't believe there is potable water from Missouri American Water Company in the area. I don't know that for a fact, so I'm just providing an assessment. And if you, maybe the residents can tell you the one way or another.
Because is all of Sherman on well water, or are they?
There's a well on site.
So there's a well on the property.
Okay. Yeah, I'm only asking for kind of selfish reasons, is when I ride down there, there's water at Castlewood, but everywhere else along the Merrimack, there's no water should you happen to need any.
Well, and I know this is a long story, and I'll do it quickly. Glencoe City Park, we purchased properties. Many of them had residences on them. All of them had potable groundwater wells. We preserved two of them, two that had good reports associated with the quality of the potable water from the aquifer. There's something in some statute or something that says before MDNR can issue a well permit for public purposes, which City of Wildwood would be, if it's in the jurisdiction of the Missouri American Water Company, they have to approve the waiver to service. Well, Missouri American Water Company wanted us to provide service because it would then serve all of Glencoe, which in rough terms doubled the price of the park. And so we didn't get a well permit and we didn't get potable water. In this particular instance, it was a combination of the state of Missouri and Missouri American Water Company, but the funding wasn't available to extend water that distance. The water had to come basically from Radcliffe Place. So we'll look into it here, we'll investigate it, and it's a good suggestion because whether you're walking, hiking, or riding a bike nearby, water on a hot day is essential.
Commissioner Levitt.
I just want to say I walked that property a couple years ago when you led us on a tour. And I just want to congratulate the department both on working with the residents of Sherman and also that this plant doesn't have invasive mountain bike trails throughout the hills.
Seeing no further discussion, Mayor Boland, you want to summarize and then we'll vote?
Yeah, so the motion is to approve the site development plan and related items that have been presented by the department, subject to two things. Number one, ensuring that the County of St. Louis cannot terminate the lease without reimbursement of the cost for the improvements. And number two, if that should occur or is possible, then there would be other sources of funding for the $250,000 cost for the project before it begins.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, seeing we have a motion and a second, roll call vote.
Commissioner Gragnani?
Yes.
Commissioner Beatty?
Yes.
Commissioner Deppler?
Yes.
Commissioner Levitt?
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn?
Yes.
Chair Lee?
Yes.
Councilmember Werther?
Aye.
Mayor Boland?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So I can have a motion to adjourn. Councilman Werther, second. Commissioner Beatty, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We are adjourned.
Thank you again. We can't do what we do with